The Heather Jean DeWild case when DNA cannot tell twins apart. A young mother walked into her estranged husband's home on a summer afternoon in 2003 and was never seen alive again. The prime suspect was not just one man, but two identical twin brothers whose matching DNA would turn what seemed like a straightforward domestic tragedy into a years-long legal maze. The question was not simply who committed the crime, but how investigators could prove which twin did what when their genetic fingerprints were virtually indistinguishable. On July 24, 2003, Heather Jean DeWild was 30 years old and the mother of two young children. She was navigating the painful process of separating from her husband, Daniel DeWild, known as Dan. The couple's marriage had deteriorated to the point where divorce proceedings were imminent, with a court date scheduled in the near future. Despite the emotional turbulence, Heather remained devoted to her children, and those who knew her best insisted she would never abandon them under any circumstances. According to court documents, 2 days before Heather disappeared, Dan had driven to her parents' home in Arvada, Colorado, carrying flowers and a card in what appeared to be an attempt at reconciliation. The visit did not go as planned. He left in anger, and the tension between the estranged couple remained unresolved. What happened over the next 48 hours would haunt investigators for nearly a decade. At the time of Heather's disappearance, Dan was living in a house on Fenton Street in Edgewater, Colorado. He was not alone. His identical twin brother, David DeWild, lived there with him, along with David's girlfriend, Roseanne Knowles. This trio sharing this residence would become central to the investigation, as prosecutors later alleged that moving Heather's body and disposing of evidence required coordination among multiple people. Around midday on July the 24th, Heather arrived at the Edgewater house with her two children. The stated purpose of her visit, according to later accounts, was practical and necessary. She needed to sign mortgage checks and obtain insurance documents for the children. Routine matters that required both parents' cooperation despite their separation. The visit should have been brief and businesslike, but it became the last time anyone outside that house would see Heather alive. One of the children later told police that they witnessed their father approach their mother from behind and that their parents had argued. After that visit, Heather vanished. Dan's explanation raised immediate red flags with her family. He admitted that Heather had been at the house, but claimed she had left to go shopping and simply never returned. To those who knew Heather's dedication to her children, this story was impossible to believe. She would not have left voluntarily without taking her kids or letting anyone know where she was going. The case grew more complicated when investigators examined what happened to Heather's white Nissan Sentra. According to the indictment that would eventually be filed, the vehicle was moved from the Fenton Street house on the same day Heather disappeared, apparently to avoid detection. This seemingly simple act of moving a car actually required careful coordination. Someone had to drive Heather's car away. Someone else had to follow in another vehicle to pick up the first driver, and someone needed to stay behind to watch the children. The logistics pointed to involvement by all three adults in the house. When police searched the Edgewater residence, they found no obvious signs of a violent struggle or bloodshed. Heather's car, when it was later located, appeared to have been cleaned unusually thoroughly. These details suggested that if a crime had occurred, someone had taken steps to cover their tracks. In early August 2003, approximately 2 weeks after Heather was last seen, her Nissan Sentra was discovered at an apartment complex in Wheat Ridge, Colorado. This location proved significant because phone records placed David DeWild in that same area on July 24th. The circumstantial evidence was mounting, but without a body or definitive proof of foul play, investigators struggled to build a prosecutable case. Cadaver dogs brought to examine David's Chevrolet Suburban showed interest in the vehicle, indicating they detected the scent of human decomposition. This reaction strengthened suspicions that David had been involved in transporting Heather's body. But at that stage of the investigation, it was not enough to secure charges that would hold up in court. On September 4, 2003, Heather's body was found in a shallow grave along US Highway 6. The discovery site was in a remote area, and the condition of the remains suggested deliberate staging. According to court documents, her body had been wrapped in garbage bags and duct tape. There were loosely tied cords around her neck and wrists, and a mask made of duct tape covered her face. Prosecutors would later argue these details indicated an attempt to mislead investigators about the manner of death or the circumstances surrounding it. A witness statement included in the indictment added another chilling layer to the case. This witness reported seeing Dan, David, and Roseanne in a canyon area near Highway 6 around 4 o'clock in the morning with Heather's car and what appeared to be a body wrapped in plastic. If accurate, this account placed all three individuals at or near the burial site during a time frame consistent with disposing of Heather's remains. The investigation now faced an extraordinary challenge. Daniel and David DeWild were identical twins, meaning their DNA profiles were virtually the same. In most criminal cases, DNA evidence can definitively place a suspect at a crime scene or link them to physical evidence. In this case, however, any biological material could have come from either brother, making it nearly impossible to assign individual responsibility based on genetics alone. Without a clear forensic path forward, the case appeared to stall. There was no direct physical evidence pointing exclusively to one twin or the other. Investigators had to rely on circumstantial evidence, witness statements, phone records, and behavioral analysis. Media reports later suggested that law enforcement suspected the perpetrators had learned techniques from crime shows on television to minimize the traces they left behind. As years passed, the case remained open but largely dormant from a public perspective. Behind the scenes, however, investigators continued to reconstruct the timeline of July 24, 2003, meticulously documenting movements, communications, and the relationships between the three people who had been in the house when Heather arrived. One detail that emerged during this period concerned David and Roseanne's marriage. According to the indictment, they got married shortly after David was informed that cadaver dogs had reacted to his vehicle. Prosecutors alleged that Roseanne had stated the marriage was intended to prevent her from being compelled to testify against her husband. This claim suggested a consciousness of guilt and an attempt to use spousal privilege as a legal shield. The breakthrough that prosecutors needed came not from a laboratory or a forensic innovation, but from a fracture in the relationship between the twin brothers. After years of silence, David DeWild agreed to cooperate with authorities and testify against his brother Dan. This decision to break ranks with his identical twin would prove decisive in bringing the case to trial. In 2000, nearly 9 years after Heather's death, the case finally went before a jury. The prosecution's strategy relied heavily on David's testimony. What he revealed in court painted a disturbing picture of what had happened on that July afternoon. According to David's account, Dan had attacked Heather in the garage of the Edgewater house. David admitted to his own role in helping to dispose of her body afterward, but placed primary responsibility for the killing on his brother. The jury deliberated on multiple charges. They found Daniel DeWild guilty of conspiracy and other related offenses, indicating they believed he had worked with others to commit and cover up the crime. However, the jury deadlocked on the charge of first-degree murder, unable to reach unanimous agreement on that most serious count. This split verdict reflected the complexity of the case and perhaps the difficulty of fully untangling the actions of identical twins. Following the jury's verdict, Daniel DeWild ultimately entered a guilty plea to second-degree murder. On February 28, 2013, he was sentenced to 74 years in prison. The resolution brought some measure of closure, though it came more than 9 years after Heather had been killed. David DeWild, having cooperated with prosecutors, pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit second-degree murder. He received a sentence of 12 years in prison, significantly less than his brother, but still reflecting his admitted role in the aftermath of Heather's death. Roseanne Knowles, who had been in the house that day, and whose marriage to David had raised questions about her knowledge and involvement, was detained at various points during the legal proceedings. However, according to local news reports, conspiracy charges against her were ultimately dismissed or dropped. Her exact level of awareness or participation remained unclear in the final accounting. For Heather's family, the path to even this partial form of justice had been agonizingly long. Nearly a decade passed between the moment Heather walked into that house and the moment her estranged husband was formally held accountable for her death. The children she left behind grew up without their mother, and her parents endured years of uncertainty before learning what had happened to their daughter. The case illustrated unique challenges that arise when criminal suspects are identical twins. Traditional forensic tools that investigators rely on to distinguish between individuals become less useful when two people share the same genetic code. The investigation had to depend on other forms of evidence, including witness testimony, phone records, vehicle movements, and ultimately the testimony of one twin against the other. There is a particular tragedy in the way identical twins who share not just DNA, but often a lifetime of experiences and bonds can become divided by crime. David's decision to testify against Dan represented more than just cooperation with authorities. It was a choice to sever one of the most fundamental human connections, acknowledging that loyalty to a sibling cannot supersede responsibility for the truth. The resolution of Heather DeWild's case also highlighted the importance of persistence in criminal investigations. When the obvious forensic pathways are blocked, dedicated investigators must find other routes to the truth. They must build their case piece by piece, from phone records, witness accounts, financial documents, and patterns of behavior. They must wait for cracks to appear in stories that initially seem impenetrable. At its core, this case reminds us that no amount of genetic similarity can conceal the fundamental differences in character and conscience. DNA may be identical, but the choices people make and the moral lines they are willing to cross separate them as individuals. When David DeWild chose to tell the truth about what happened to Heather, he demonstrated that family bonds, however strong, cannot and should not shield criminal conduct from accountability. Heather Jean DeWild was 30 years old when she died, a young mother caught in a failing marriage who had the misfortune to trust that a routine visit to handle paperwork would be safe. Her case became emblematic of how domestic situations can escalate into violence, and how covering up that violence can involve multiple participants. It also showed how justice, though delayed, can still be achieved when someone chooses truth over silence. The legal principle that guides our justice system holds that guilt must be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. In cases involving identical twins, establishing that proof requires creativity, persistence, and sometimes a break from within. The DeWild case succeeded not because of a technological breakthrough or a clever forensic technique, but because one brother ultimately decided that protecting the other was a burden he could no longer carry. This case stands as a testament to the dedication of investigators who refused to let a difficult case go cold, to the family members who never stopped seeking answers, and to the principle that justice may be slow but need not be forever out of reach. It serves as a reminder that the search for truth in criminal cases sometimes depends less on what can be found in a laboratory and more on what can be revealed through human testimony and the weight of conscience. The story of Heather DeWild's disappearance and the years-long effort to hold someone accountable offers lessons about the complexities of criminal investigation, the limitations of forensic science in unusual circumstances, and the ultimate importance of human testimony in establishing the truth. While DNA evidence has revolutionized criminal justice, this case demonstrated that even identical genetic profiles cannot prevent justice when someone with direct knowledge chooses to speak. For those interested in true crime cases and the intricacies of criminal investigation, the Heather DeWild case presents a unique study in how law enforcement adapts when traditional methods fall short. We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments about how twin suspects should be investigated and what safeguards our legal system needs when genetic evidence cannot distinguish between individuals. Subscribe to our channel to follow more cases that challenge our understanding of criminal justice and explore the dark corners where human behavior intersects with the law. The Heather DeWild tragedy teaches us that justice systems must evolve beyond relying solely on physical evidence, and that the strength of our legal framework ultimately rests on individuals choosing truth over silence, even when that truth implicates those closest to them. This case reminds society that domestic violence can escalate behind closed doors in ways we never anticipate, and that vigilance, persistence, and the courage to speak up remain our most powerful tools against those who believe they can evade accountability. We encourage you to share your perspective in the comments based on the facts presented in this case. What do you think about the challenges of investigating identical twins? How should the justice system handle cases where DNA cannot distinguish between suspects? Subscribe to our channel to stay updated on this case and explore more mysterious and chilling criminal cases that push the boundaries of forensic science and test the limits of our legal system. From unsolved disappearances to complex investigations that took years to crack, we bring you detailed analyses of the cases that continue to fascinate and haunt us.